Hi, I'm Jon Claytor, the creator of Nowhere, and this is the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to celebrate Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Jon Claytor about his graphic novel Nowhere, published by Goose Lane Editions. Jon Claytor is a graphic novelist, painter, and writer based in Sackville, New Brunswick. After establishing himself as an oil painter, Jon fell in love with graphic storytelling. Take the Long Way Home, his memoir, was published by Conundrum Press in 2022. In addition to writing graphic novels, Jon has written many illustrated interviews for the CBC and for the new online resource hub, www.ruralharmreduction.com. Jon enjoys teaching creative workshops for a variety of audiences, focusing on storytelling and comic memoirs. His new graphic novel is entitled Nowhere from Goose Lane Editions. The story of Nowhere goes like this. Drawn by a mysterious force, 12-year-old Joel and his terrible parents have arrived in yet another nondescript small town. There's a diner, a movie theater, and a bar, but this time things seem different, especially when suddenly out of nowhere a giant cube appears on the edge of town, and just as Joel starts to make friends and navigate a new school, which is hard enough, Beauséjour is beset by nightly appearances of zombies, demon landlords, therapy-seeking vampires, and depressed clowns. One by one, the citizens of Beauséjour begin to disappear. When his parents vanish, Joel and his friend Charlie seek to shelter themselves from the strangeness all around them. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Jon Claytor about his graphic novel, Nowhere, published by Goose Lane Editions. So, Jon Claytor, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Appreciate your time. Before we get going with all the questions, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
That's an interesting question, and I'm going to kind of turn it around a little bit because the first book that I read that was pictures and text that had a profound effect on me was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the Narnia series and the illustrations by Pauline Baynes. And those illustrations just at the young age, before I could even read, I would look at those drawings over and over again and get a sense of the story and storytelling through visuals. And they just hit something in my core that I still resonates with me today.
Cool. So great stuff growing up, but I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
That's a good question. And, there's a lot of writers, photographers, friends locally as well who inspire me. Cole Pauls is a big inspiration, just how creative and how he tries different genres, but it's always making a really good point and it's always his voice. Heather O'Neill is a writer, just the way that she writes about childhood really connects with me. But I think really it's when I go out and do workshops in my community and somebody makes something and they never thought they could make something. And suddenly they're like, oh, I do have a beautiful story to tell, or I have something to share. That reminds me why I do it. And that back and forth of like sharing and then like receiving art, just like one on one, like totally just the one on one now is really what inspires me. And it doesn't have to be, a comics superstar. It can be, or it can be somebody who just is trying comics for the first time. I get equally inspired by both of those things.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, my sort of mantra for this year is being more analog, and I think you've got it nailed down, where
Yeah.
you're interacting with people in the local area and being inspired by them. So that's really cool. Good stuff. So we're here talking about your latest graphic novel, Nowhere, published by Goose Lane Editions. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the story. What is it all about?
Okay, well, Nowhere's a story about a young boy. It begins and he's in the car in between apartments. They've had to make a midnight move. He's with his mother and his stepfather and his dog, his cat, and his two turtles. They arrive in this town. It's full of monsters, but it's really about growing up in you're in between being a child and being an adult. My upbringing was often in between different homes, and you don't really know where you fit in the world yet. So it takes place in this small town. It's about this boy trying to figure out how he fits and how he's going to deal with a life that is like terrifying, that is just full of monsters and creatures. And that's just the way it is.
What was your inspiration for your graphic novel? I presume that it had something to do with your background.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of different inspirations. Like one was watching my own kids go through that phase of life of figuring out how they were going to fit into this world. And drawing from my own childhood, I was constantly in transition. I went to 11 different schools before I was in grade 10. So I knew what it was like to adjust to a new environment. And then I live in a small town now. The opposite of being in transition, I often feel stuck here. Like a lot of people in small towns do from time to time. I love where I live, but I feel stuck here sometimes. And I looked around and was like, okay, well, if I am stuck here, what are the elements that I can make a story with? And we have this mysterious cube in my town. I have my family and I have my connections with people. So I thought, okay, these are the building blocks that I'm going to make my story with. And I didn't know where it was going to go, what it was going to be. I just started on page one and started drawing.
Yeah, that's curious. A lot of people sort of yearn for a lesser hectic life, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Uh, and you seem to have found it, but then you feel trapped at the same time, which is
Oh,
curious.
yeah. You see people constantly move to this town in particular, but I think all small towns, especially during COVID, and so many people from the city would move in and they're like, I'm going to have this beautiful life. And then they're like, oh, it's got all the problems of the city, but I can't get a doctor. Or like, and now I'm stuck here and I can only see the movie that's playing an hour away.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to ask you then, because you had a previous graphic novel called Take the Long Way Home in
Yeah.
2022. Is there a difference, or how does this book Nowhere differ from your previous graphic novel?
There's a huge difference. And honestly, I was hoping there would be a bigger difference. So I wrote Take the Long Way Home, which is a memoir, and it's about addiction and it's about a lot of things that are quite heavy. And, it was like reflecting inward. And when I was done that, I was like, okay, I need to look outward. So I started doing some comics journalism, which was great. But then you're holding like all these stories, and that becomes sort of I love it, but it's like I needed something else. And I thought, fiction, that'll be this great escape. I'll escape trauma, I'll escape the past, and I'll just dive into this fictional world. But as I was writing, it turns out that I think this happens to a lot of authors with their first book, but so much of it was parallels to my own life or create this character and think it was the stepfather. He's this total super cruel to Joel. And, I thought, okay, well, here's a character that's different. And then I realized, oh, that's my inner dialogue. That's how I talk to myself in my head, and I doubt everything I do. And I was like, I can't escape. I can't escape. It's kind of like being stuck in the small town. And, it's like I thought fiction would be this door. Hopefully, maybe the next book, I'll get a little further away and a little into pure imagination. But it was kind of funny to find that fiction just brought me right back to where I was with Take the Long Way Home.
Now, you mentioned comics journalism. I'm not too familiar with that. Can you explain what that's all about?
Yeah, that'd be kind of like what Joe Sacco does when he does work in Palestine and interviews people and shares like what's happening there through his comics. And what I do here out on the East Coast, I do some work with the CBC where I do a series that's really about how people have gone through some difficult experiences but have found a moment of peace. And I interview them and tell their story in a comic format. And then I also do a series with people who are dealing in different aspects of the opioid crisis. And I interview people and work together to share their stories, whether they've been affected, family members been affected, or themselves. And I really love that work. Yeah, I really love doing comics journalism.
It definitely makes it real. I have to bring up this touchy subject of AI and artificial intelligence. I know there's
Right.
a lot of publishers out there and newspapers and outlets that feel that due to time crunch, they can just say a command and all of a sudden get an illustration.
Yeah.
But I feel personally that having a real person create that story and have it captured, I think
Yeah.
in an illustrated form really works better. But what do you think about the whole thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like one thing that I found from working with people who might have more of a precarious lifestyle is they really appreciate that it looks like something that they could do. Like it looks like something that where somebody like wrote down on a piece of paper. It wasn't processed through a computer. And surprisingly, that makes it more accessible for a lot of people. And again, like coming back to like what we were talking about earlier is like that one-on-one is like, AI can't have an experience for me. It can't have a conversation for me, and it can't be an active listener for somebody else sharing. And to me, that's what the art's about. It's about that one-on-one experience. And then the comic is like the thing that follows. But the first thing is that interaction between the listener and the person sharing and back and forth.
Right. Well, I wanted to switch gears here a wee bit
Yeah.
and talk about your creative process. Can you talk about the tools you use to create your book Nowhere?
Yeah, I love making things by hand, analog, before I was a comic artist, and still I'm a painter. And I was like really into like making my own varnishes, never use a projector, everything by eye and by hand. And I had tried to make comics before, and what really held me back was I could not keep track of the pages. Like I would just like make some pages and I would lose them, and I'd make some more and I would lose them. So about 10 years ago, I got an iPad and that changed the game for me. So I switched to digital and suddenly, like the iPad keeps track of your pages. So I wasn't losing my pages. And then I was able to finish something. And it was surprising to me because it was completely against my nature to work digitally. But what I find for me, myself, is I don't mind if it has I like artwork that reflects the materials. So the iPad for me has this amazing ability that like the stylus moves quicker than a pencil on paper. So you capture more emotion and like more sensitivity. And I just strip all the effects down. I just use like a very simple pen. I don't want it to not look digital, but I want it to have what digital can give me that pen and paper doesn't, which is that like lightning fast reaction to my line, to my jitters, to all those things. And I kind of always work in this spiral. So I've been enjoying digital, but now I'm making like some zines and comics like completely analog again, just because that gives me something different. So honestly, like digital art, iPads changed my life and it gave me this opportunity to make comics. I don't like when digital, for me, I wouldn't use it to like fake ink or to fake oil painting. I'm okay with it looking kind of like what it is.
Do you have a favorite application that you use on the iPad?
I started with Adobe Draw. They discontinued that, and now I use what they replaced it, which is Fresco. And it's not great. It's not perfect. Many things I don't like about it, but it can be extremely basic. That's what I like.
I wanted to ask you about working with Goose Lane Editions, the publisher of the book Nowhere. How is it like working with them?
Oh, they're really great, actually, because this is their first graphic novel. So it's a bit of a learning curve for them. And I'm not sure I'm the most standard comics artist for them to work with. So I bet the next person they work with, it'll also be a learning curve. But the thing that I love the most about them is their fiction editor, Bethany Gibson, worked intensively with me on the story and the pacing and really took the time to edit this book the way that she edits the novels that she works on. And that was a really amazing experience for me. I sort of hoped that one day could sort of have somebody look at my work so intently with so much care and attention and also like love, I guess. And I know the book became 100% better from going through that process. We took it from 650 pages to 450. So there was a lot of cutting to do. And if it wasn't somebody I trusted, I think I would have been a mess.
Wow, that sounds like a fair chunk was removed. Did that
Yeah.
affect you in any way? How did you
Yeah.
deal with that?
Yeah, it was kind of intense. I have it all in a folder and it's not lost. It was kind of intense. It's because I work like without an outline and the story developed like page by page essentially. It was kind of like improvising a movie and then, well, you have to cut it down from 6 hours to 2 hours or people will get bored. At the end of the day, there are some tangents that were cut that I think would make nice, maybe a graphic novel on their own. There was a whole swamp monster love story that was cut that was like one of my favorite storylines, which I think will become part of my next book. So yeah, I just had to take a deep breath and do what was best for the book.
You mentioned earlier that you hold workshops
Yeah.
leading folks to create. I'm wondering what's one piece of advice you pass along to someone who wants to make their own graphic memoir?
I don't think I can do just one piece of advice, but one thing I would say is start writing as if no one's ever going to read it. You can decide what to cut out after. So don't worry that your mom's going to read it or your partner's going to read it. Just get it on paper. And then when you're done, you might be surprised at what you're willing to share. It might be a lot more than you would share if you started by editing out those areas. And that's where the healing is going to happen too. So when it comes to memoir, yeah, like don't edit yourself. You can do that later. And two other pieces of advice is one, give yourself permission to make art. It's as important as anything else in your life. It should be a human right. We need it. Like everybody needs it, whether they're going to be a professional or not, just to be at peace with the world and to see the changes that you want to make. And then thirdly, the main thing is sit down in that chair and don't get up again. I think Hemingway said that was the secret to writing. And I think it's so true. Like sit down and like don't get up for at least an hour and you will make something because you'll get bored.
Yeah, I've read Stephen King's On Writing book, and he has a
Yeah.
dedicated period of time. Do you have the same sort of thing where you dedicate this time of the day, every day, I will sit there and do something and then not move? Do you do the same thing?
Yeah, but I'm not good at keeping to a routine. So the thing that I am dedicated to is making something every day. And if I don't, I feel very ill at ease. So my body tells me I gotta like get in the studio and make something or write something. But when it gets down more to like crunch time of editing or something, then I'm like, yeah, I've got my strict hours where I sit down and I don't get up. But generally, I feel like for me, it's incorporating the creative process into everything. When I'm walking my dog, I'm thinking of stories. If I go to a talk or something, I'm sketching and drawing. And it's just incorporating it into my life as much as making that dedicated time for sure.
Does the iPad help at all with that process because it's a portable digital device to start the drawing, or do you just say, no, the iPad stays right here?
iPad, I'll get out of the library when I'm like gonna like make a comic, but I have 5 sketchbooks in my bag. They're different sizes for different, vibes. And I have a sketchbook that fits in my pocket of my jacket, and I've got a smaller sketchbook that I can just carry anywhere. So for me, it's like I am like working analog more than I'm working digitally. Like that's where I'm making my notes and story ideas and sketching the people around me. It's all analog. And I just have, yeah, I'm not good at keeping track of things. So I've always got so many sketchbooks on the go at one time. And I remember like when I was a kid and I finished my first sketchbook, what a feeling of accomplishment that was. And it still is. Like it's a great feeling to finish a sketchbook.
Now, you hinted before that there were some remainders left from the
Mhm.
editing process of Nowhere. Can I ask you then, what's your next project that you're working on?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm working on another story that takes place in Beauséjour, which is the town that Nowhere takes place in. It's all different characters. What's happened is a fascist, a nearby fascist dictatorship has rolled into town, and you see how the townsfolk react, like who becomes a collaborator, who ignores it, who resists it. But the main story is a sort of love triangle between a swamp creature who lives on the edge of town and two young people in Beauséjour. And, the swamp creature kind of represents like this other world. And it's just how the three of them, figure out what they want in this world that has changed so much for them in the last like couple months with this invading army.
Wow. Okay. Something to look forward to for sure.
Yeah, I hope so.
Do you have any events planned for this year to promote your graphic novel? Will you be going anywhere to do some promotion,
Yeah.
exhibition?
Coming up in the Maritimes, going on a little mini tour with two old friends, Ian Roy, who has a book of short stories out on Gaspereau, and Julie Dwaron, who's a singer-songwriter. And we've collaborated for 30 years on different things. And so we're going to do this little series of shows, I guess. We'll have readings and music. And I'm also going to sort of try to get everybody to draw while we're there. And I'm hoping that'll be really fun. Then I'm going to TCAF and MCAF, and we'll be doing some things in Ontario and hopefully going to VanCAF for the first time. So I'm really excited to get out there and see what happens.
Have you been to the Montreal Comic Arts Festival before?
Yeah, I went to that one with Take the Long Way Home. It's quite an experience, but this time I'll be tabling, so I'll find out what 3 days outdoors tabling will feel like.
Well, with everything that you have on the go today and in the future, where do you recommend that people go to find you online?
Well, I have a website that I'm not great at updating. So the best place to find me online is on Instagram, and it's Jon_Claytor_art. I do have a lot of fun with Instagram and posting things. So that's the best place to see what I'm up to.
Well, John, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you want to get across in this interview?
Those were great questions. I've listened to some of your other interviews and I love how sort of supportive and inquisitive, like you're a great interviewer. I love this project that you're doing. And really the one thing that I would have said, you asked me, and that was to give yourself permission to make a comic. Like being a fan is great, but make something for yourself. I'm sure there's a friend who will enjoy it too.
Thanks to Jon for the chat. You can discover more about Jon online at jonclaytor.com and on Instagram at Jon_Claytor_art. You can discover more about Nowhere, the graphic novel, at gooselane.com. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations with creators about making comic books and graphic novels. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media platforms, and you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to Jon at truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2026.